Hello, my hobbyist fruits. I am back with another chapter from January, the first book in the Countdown series. So, let's get started. Chapter 2, The Jump Club, New York City, 3:01 a.m. Julia Morrison breathed a long sigh of relief. For some reason, the deafening music had abruptly stopped. The dance floor had become darkened. The only remaining light came from some glowing cigarettes and a few flickering red candles scattered about the room. Maybe I can go home now, she thought sadly. She was sleepy and her ears were ringing. She never understood how people could stand to listen to such loud music for so long. It wasn't even real music, it was just a beat. She'd never gone for techno stuff, the repetitive thump 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 that never changed, but who cared what she thought? Nobody, least of all Luke, that much was obvious. He was still dancing with that girl. Couldn't he see that the party was over? The club owners had turned everything off, and Luke was still dancing. Slow dancing. Without music. By candlelight. He and the girl had their arms wrapped around each other and entwined like two snakes. Julia lowered her eyes. She couldn't look at them. She leaned back into the plush velvet couch and stared at the candle burning on one of the low tables nearby. She supposed she should just curl up and go to sleep right here. Do you know what's going on? Huh? Julia glanced up. It was the guy sitting next to her, some slick man in a suit and a shirt buttoned all the way to the top. He looked confused. Do you know why they turned the music off? He asked. And the lights? Julia shrugged nervously. She didn't know what to say. The words might come out wrong and she'd be exposed for what she was, a lonely and underdressed 17-year-old girl who had no business being in a club at 3 o'clock in the morning. And maybe she'd get kicked out, which might not be a bad thing, except Luke would lose his temper. Maybe it's the last call, she finally offered. The man grinned at her. Last call is until 7. He glanced around the darker room, then stood up. I bet DJ Snow is messing with our heads, he said, wandering off toward the bar. DJ Snow pulled something like this last year, too. Julia nodded, even though she had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. A bittersweet smile passed over her lips. Luke would probably sell his soul to trade places with that guy. He was everything Luke wanted to be, an insider at the Jump Club, good-looking and probably loaded. She shook her head, staring at the candle. Luke, he'd been so cocky and proud when he scored those 2 fake IDs yesterday, like he'd finally become something important. 2 one-way tickets to New York Best Blowout, free champagne at midnight, and dancing till dawn. Who'd been there last year? Some rapper? Someone famous? It was the place to be. Luke hadn't even bothered to ask Julia if she wanted to go. He busted a hump getting the ideas, so she didn't have a choice. He'd made that very clear. It didn't matter that Julia hated dancing. It didn't matter that Julia didn't drink. It didn't matter that Julia dreaded New Year's Eve. Dreaded it because the same December night 3 years ago, the way her mom and dad had waved goodbye, the phone call from the police and the ride to the morgue, the way she'd been forced to move to New York City to live with Uncle Clem, the way she'd lost everything to a drunk driver who was serving just 4 years in prison. 4 years for vehicular manslaughter. No, it didn't matter. Luke wanted to spend New Year's Eve his way, so he brought her here and dumped her on the couch. He discarded her like a broken toy while he chatted up some beautiful girl whose skin was so smooth and white that she could have starred in every soap commercial. I'm not going to look at them, Julia promised herself. I'm not going to give him the satisfaction of knowing how miserable I am. What had happened to her life anyway? What had she done to be so desperately lonely? If only she could trade places with somebody, a total stranger. Wait a minute. She was a total stranger, wasn't she? In a way, she was. Tonight, she was a 23-year-old somebody named Sharon Brown. She dug into her jeans pocket and pulled out the fake ID. And when she squinted at the photo in the dim light, she almost managed to laugh. The girl didn't even look like her. Sure, they were both African-American. They both had long brown curls, but that was as far as the resemblance went. Sharon Brown must have been at least 30 pounds heavier than Julia. Julia was skinny. Skin and bones, her mom used to call her when Julia was a little girl. Put that away, Luke hissed. Julia's head jerked up. She hadn't even heard him coming. His blue eyes were blazing. His pale skin seemed flushed in the orange glow of the candles. Out of habit, her body tensed. What's wrong? She asked. He snatched the card out of her hands and shoved it into his back pocket. Nobody just sits around and look at their ID, you idiot. He growled. He glanced around the room. Now it's obvious that it's fake. You're gonna get us both kicked out. Julia bit her lip. Why was he so mad? Nobody was looking at them, but she was too frightened of him to raise her voice, and he knew it. "What's your problem?" he demanded. "Nothing," she mumbled wretchedly. She sighed and gazed around the dimly lit club. All the confident, stylish people were now shuffling in different directions, looking lost. The slick guy returned from the bar and sat down next to her, absently slurping an exotic-looking drink. He stared into the crowd, clearly searching for a familiar face. It was almost funny in a way. Nobody knew what to do. There was an undercurrent of bewilderment in the air. "I was just thinking that the place is probably closing now anyway," she added. Luke shook his head, then flopped down on a nearby couch. "It's not. There's just some kind of problem with the power. A fuse blew or something." Julia raised her eyebrows. "Are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure," he stated. He frowned, then folded his arms across his chest. "Serena told me." "Serena?" He cast a quick sidelong glance at her. "The girl I was dancing with." "Oh, right." Julia swallowed. She forced a brittle smile. "Your new friend. What happened to her?" "Jesus, don't start, Julia," he moaned. "It's not my fault that you don't like to dance." Julia started grinding her teeth. "Just leave him," the familiar voice suddenly screamed in the back of her head. "Right now. Just run out the door." But she never listened to the voice. As she ran, he would find her. He could already envision the look in his eye, the tight fist raised above her face, and she couldn't fool herself. He was all she had. She had no friends in the city. Uncle Clem sure didn't give a damn about her. But where was the Luke she'd met all those months ago? The good-looking charmer. Had he even existed? "It's cold in here," Luke suddenly complained. "You cold?" Julia sighed. She hadn't noticed, but now that she mentioned it, she was a little chilly. There was a draft, as if somebody had opened all the doors. The draft picked up a little. She shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. Somebody must have opened the doors. She was going to say something, but a gust of winter wind swept through the room, swiftly extinguishing all the candles. The club was now pitch black. Julia drew in her breath. "Oh, man," Luke grumbled. His disembodied voice seemed to flow out from nowhere. Julia squirmed in her seat. People all around her started whispering heatedly. There was no reason to panic, none at all, but the whole thing was a little disturbing. New Year's Eve was bad enough without having to sit in the dark, in a strange place, surrounded by people she didn't know or want to know. How long did it take to change the fuse anyway? "Julia," Luke asked. "Yeah? You okay?" Julia drummed her fingers on her knees. "Fine. Why don't you try and walk over?" And his voice began to fade, then fell into an incomprehensible mumble. Julia pursed her lips. What did he say? If he answered, she didn't hear. There's a peculiar rushing noise in her ears. She shook her head. "Luke?" The noise grew louder. It seemed hollow, like a wind rustling in the trees, or the ripple of a distant waterfall. Only there was a deep undertone, an ominous bass note hidden beneath it. It wasn't coming from the club. No, the sound was coming from somewhere else. It was expanding, spreading through her body. Julia clutched at the couch. Something was definitely wrong. She could barely feel the velvet. Her fingers were numb. She felt queasy, disoriented. Her insides were mushy, and her body was sagging, pushing downward as she was speeding blindly over the peak of a hill in a car that was going much too fast. Sunlight. The darkness has lifted. Yes, I can see the sun. It's high overhead, beating down on me. And it's hot, impossibly hot. Desert sun. I'm in the desert. There's nothing but dry, scorched earth, stretching all the way to the mountains. The sword is in my hand. I'm alone, but I have the sword. The demon is near. I can hear its breath. I have to face the demon. I force myself to stare into its eyes. They're black, impossibly black. They glisten like two wet stones. The rest of its body is consumed in fire. I'm afraid, but if I lift the sword and plunge it into the flames, I can— Julia! Luke barked. Her eyes popped open. What's wrong with you? We gotta get out of here now. What do you mean? She stuttered. It took her a moment to realize she was sitting in the dark again. The nausea was gone. So was the rushing sound. In fact, the air was strangely quiet. She was still on the velvet couch, only Luke's voice was much closer. Had she fallen asleep? Or passed out? Had somebody slipped her some drugs? That hallucination or dream or whatever. It still clung to her. Julia, for Christ's sake, Luke cried. Julia swallowed. She couldn't get her bearings. What's wrong? The screaming, Luke whimpered. The guy next to you, Serena. Something happened to them. Julia shook her head. She must be going crazy. Nothing was making any sense anymore. Touch that guy, Luke Reed. Just touch him. Julia reached blindly across the couch. but the man was gone. Touch him, Luke repeated. Her fingers wiggled in the darkness. She was trying to touch the guy, but he wasn't there. Things were too weird. Somebody must have drugged her. That kind of sick prank happened all the time at parties like this, right? Her hand began to fall, slowly, until it dropped into something completely unexpected. Something that felt like a steaming puddle of wet putty.